The sun was beginning to set over the clear waters of the Hawaiian coastline, casting golden hues across the surface as waves gently lapped against the rocks. It was a perfect day for a dive. The water temperature was ideal, and the visibility was clear, perfect for exploring the vibrant coral reefs that lay just beneath the surface. Nastasha, a 28-year-old marine biologist, was always in her element when she was underwater. For her, diving wasn't just a job or a hobby, it was a calling. Today, however, she was joined by her close friend Max, a 30-year-old photographer and avid traveler, who was less interested in the science and more in capturing the raw beauty of the ocean through his camera lens. Max had never been particularly drawn to marine life, but he respected Nastasha's work, and over the years, they had become accustomed to exploring the underwater world together. This dive, though, would change everything. The group of divers, including a few other enthusiasts, was already descending into the crystal-clear waters when they noticed something unusual. As they neared a small reef off the coast, Nastasha's keen eyes caught a glimpse of a large, dark shape, tangled in what appeared to be a discarded fishing net. Max's camera clicked instinctively, but his curiosity soon turned to concern when he realized what it was. A large shark, at least 3 meters in length, was caught in the net. Its sleek body thrashed violently against the entangling ropes, but the more it struggled, the tighter the net seemed to grip. It was clear the animal was in distress, and it was only a matter of time before the shark would exhaust itself or suffer irreparable injury. "Max, we need to help it," Nastasha said urgently, pointing towards the shark. Her voice was muffled through the regulator, but there was no mistaking the determination in her eyes. Max nodded, his photographer's instincts now overshadowed by the need to act. Without a second thought, the two swam toward the entangled shark, signaling the rest of the group to stay back. The water around them felt colder as they approached the creature. Nastasha, who had worked with marine animals for years, could see the fear in the shark's movements, but she also knew how important it was not to panic. The last thing the animal needed was more stress. Nastasha reached for the knife strapped to her leg and began carefully cutting through the net. It was a slow process, as the net had tangled tightly around the shark's fins and gills. With each cut, the shark seemed to regain a bit of its composure, though it still struggled against the restraints. Max stayed close, his camera now forgotten as he hovered near the shark's head, trying to keep it calm with slow, steady movements. He had never been this close to a shark before, and despite Nastasha's reassurance, the power and sheer size of the animal were intimidating. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last strand of net was cut free. The shark, though exhausted, was now free to swim again. It paused for a moment, almost as if assessing its newfound freedom, then turned and swam away into the deeper waters. Nastasha and Max exchanged relieved glances before making their way back to the surface. Their hearts were racing, not just from the excitement of the rescue, but from the realization of how dire the situation was. This was not the first time they had encountered discarded fishing nets, but seeing such a magnificent creature suffering because of human negligence left them both shaken. "That was too close," Max said as they surfaced, his voice full of concern. He adjusted his mask, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a sense of urgency. "What happens when they can't get free? How many more are out there like that?" Nastasha took a deep breath, pushing her hair out of her face. "Too many," she said quietly. "Too many." The rest of the dive group gathered around, but the mood had shifted. What had started as an exploration of the reef now felt like a stark reminder of the damage humans were doing to the ocean. On their way back to the boat, Nastasha couldn't shake the image of the shark's eyes, wild with fear. She knew this was just one case, but it was part of a much larger problem, a growing threat to marine life along the Hawaiian coast. "Max," she began, her voice serious. "We have to do something about this. That shark. It's just one of many. We need to start raising awareness. This isn't just a random occurrence. It's part of a bigger issue with illegal fishing. People are leaving these nets in the water, and it's killing marine life." Max nodded slowly, the weight of the situation beginning to sink in. "I'm with you. Let's do something about it." The boat ride back to the harbor was quiet, everyone lost in their thoughts. As they approached the dock, Nastasha felt a resolve settle over her. The incident with the shark had shaken her, but it had also ignited something within her, a sense of responsibility to protect the creatures she had dedicated her life to studying. She didn't know yet what form their campaign would take, but one thing was certain: it had to begin now. The following days were filled with a sense of urgency. Nastasha and Max couldn't stop thinking about the shark and the devastating reality they had witnessed firsthand. It wasn't just a one-off incident. This was part of a much larger problem that was affecting the health of the oceans, and the more they thought about it, the more they realized they had to act quickly. After returning to their small coastal town, they met up with their friends and colleagues who worked in environmental conservation. Among them was Harriet, a 35-year-old fisherman and longtime resident of the town, whose perspective on the matter proved invaluable. He was known in the community for his vast knowledge of local marine life, and while he wasn't an activist, his experiences on the water had shown him just how bad things had become. "You're right," Harriet said, sitting at a local cafe with Nastasha and Max. "It's getting worse. The illegal fishing operations, the nets, they're all over the place. There's no one really keeping track of what's going on out there." Harriet had been a fisherman for nearly 2 decades, and he'd seen it all. Overfishing, illegal netting, and the steady decline in fish populations. He had grown increasingly concerned, but being a fisherman, he also understood the complexity of the situation. "The problem is it's all about money," Harriet continued, his face grim. "Those guys who run these illegal operations aren't interested in conservation. They're here for the quick profit. They don't care that they're wiping out entire species or causing destruction to the ecosystem. The fish come and go, but these nets, they leave a permanent mark." Max, who had been quietly listening, leaned forward. "So what do we do about it?" he asked. "How do we even begin to stop something this big?" Harriet took a slow sip from his coffee, thinking. "You'll need more than just a few people pushing against it. You'll need the community behind you. You'll need to raise awareness, educate people, and get the authorities involved. This isn't going to be easy, but if you can get the public to care, then you might have a chance." Nastasha nodded. "We're going to need a plan, and we're going to need to spread the message as far as we can. If people realize how bad this is, we might be able to put enough pressure on the government and authorities to crack down on these illegal operations." Harriet's experience with the community made him an invaluable ally, and he agreed to help them spread the word. Over the next few weeks, Nastasha, Max, and Harriet reached out to local fishermen, environmentalists, and marine biologists. The task was monumental, but it was clear that they couldn't do it alone. The group began organizing informational sessions for local residents and businesses. They collaborated with local dive shops and marine tour operators, reaching out to anyone who might be willing to help. One of the first big steps was a public seminar held at a community center in the heart of the town. It was a simple event, but the turnout was impressive. More than 70 people showed up, including a mix of local fishermen, divers, conservationists, and concerned residents. Nastasha was the lead speaker, presenting the issue in a clear and compelling way. She spoke about the devastation caused by discarded fishing nets, highlighting the devastating impact on marine life. She shared the shocking images of entangled animals, sharks, sea turtles, and dolphins, all victims of the same deadly practice. Nastasha explained that these nets were not just traps for individual animals. They were responsible for the destruction of entire ecosystems. "These nets aren't just abandoned once they're done," Nastasha explained to the audience. "They continue to catch and kill marine life, often for months or even years, until they eventually break apart and deteriorate. But in that time, they create a ripple effect that damages coral reefs, disrupts the food chain, and threatens species with extinction. It's a problem that we can no longer ignore." Max had been busy behind the scenes, capturing footage of the seminar and taking photographs of the audience reactions. His goal was to create a powerful video that could be shared on social media, reaching a wider audience beyond their small community. He knew that raising awareness was only part of the battle. What they needed was a call to action, something that would spur people to demand change. The seminar was just the beginning. Following the event, Max and Nastasha decided to take things further by reaching out to local journalists and news outlets. With Harriet's help, they were able to schedule interviews with local radio stations and newspapers, shedding light on the issue in a more public forum. The press quickly picked up on the story, and the issue of illegal fishing and discarded nets gained traction in local conversations. In the meantime, the group also began working with local environmental organizations to compile data and reports on the extent of illegal fishing in the area. They needed hard facts to back up their claims and to convince authorities that this wasn't just an isolated issue. It was a growing crisis. Their research revealed disturbing numbers. An increasing number of marine animals were being found entangled in fishing nets, and local fisheries were reporting a decline in their catches. The situation was worsening, and it wasn't just the sharks and dolphins that were suffering. Entire ecosystems were on the verge of collapse. It wasn't long before they received an unexpected ally in the form of Jason, a 40-year-old environmental lawyer with years of experience fighting for marine conservation. He had been following their efforts and contacted them to offer his help. Jason was a seasoned advocate who had worked on several high-profile environmental cases, and he immediately saw the potential in their cause. "If we want to take this to the next level, We need to push for stronger legal protections, Jason said during their first meeting. We need to work with local lawmakers to create policies that ban these nets outright. And we need to make sure that the penalties for using them are severe enough to deter anyone from continuing this practice. Jason's expertise in environmental law would prove invaluable. Together, they started drafting a petition that they planned to present to local government officials, calling for stronger legislation against illegal fishing and the use of harmful nets. The group also began reaching out to international organizations, hoping to gain broader support for their cause. Nastasha, Max, Harriet, and the rest of the team knew that the battle was just beginning. But with each step forward, the momentum was building. They were no longer just a small group of concerned individuals, they were becoming a movement. The days following their initial efforts had been both busy and overwhelming. What started as a small initiative among a few concerned individuals was now growing into something much bigger. Nastasha, Max, Harriet, and their new ally Jason were no longer just advocating for change. They were organizing a full-scale campaign to protect marine life from the dangers of illegal fishing. But they knew this wasn't going to be easy. The campaign's primary goal was clear: raise awareness of the illegal fishing practices threatening local marine life and push for stronger laws to protect the oceans. But as the team began to organize, they realized how difficult it would be to convince both the public and local authorities to act. The first obstacle was getting the attention of the government. It had been a long time since local fishermen and environmental groups had come together to demand real change. Many local officials had long been in the pocket of powerful fishing corporations, and pushing back against these interests would require a concerted effort. Jason was quick to recognize this challenge. We need to approach this from two angles, he explained during one of their strategy meetings. First, we need to make sure the public understands how serious the issue is. They need to know that this isn't just a problem for divers and marine biologists. It's a problem for everyone. Second, we need to apply pressure on the government to act. That means lobbying lawmakers, working with the media, and making sure the people have a voice in the decision-making process. With that in mind, the group focused on two immediate goals: creating a compelling visual campaign to educate the public and organizing a series of demonstrations to build support for their cause. Max was instrumental in this phase. Armed with his camera and an eye for powerful imagery, he spent the next few weeks capturing footage and photographs of the damage done by illegal fishing practices. He took underwater shots of sharks tangled in nets, sea turtles struggling for breath, and other marine creatures ensnared in the deadly ropes of abandoned fishing gear. His footage was raw, unfiltered, and emotionally charged. Max knew that if he could get people to understand the gravity of the situation, they would be compelled to act. Together with Nastasha, they began working on a short video that would showcase their findings. They included interviews with local divers, marine biologists, and fishermen, each explaining how illegal fishing was impacting the local ecosystem. Harriet, who had grown increasingly passionate about the cause, was featured prominently in the video, sharing his personal experiences as a fisherman and expressing his frustration with the lack of accountability for illegal fishing operations. As they edited the footage, Max and Nastasha were careful to make sure the video conveyed a sense of urgency without sensationalizing the issue. They wanted the message to be clear. Illegal fishing wasn't just an environmental issue. It was a threat to the community's way of life, their economy, and their future. When the video was finally ready, they launched a social media campaign to spread it. They posted it on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, hoping to reach as many people as possible. They also partnered with local businesses, dive shops, and environmental organizations to amplify their message. The response was overwhelming. Within days, the video had been shared thousands of times, and the hashtag #SaveTheSharksHawaii began trending across social media platforms. For the first time, the community was truly paying attention. But while the public was reacting, the local government was slow to respond. Nastasha and Jason knew that the next step would be critical. They needed to get face-to-face meetings with key lawmakers and convince them that this was a cause worth fighting for. "All of our efforts so far have been important," Jason said one evening as they gathered in their small office. "But now we have to take it to the next level. We need to get the local government to commit to addressing this issue. We can't let this die out before we get real change." To do this, they started lobbying local politicians. They researched the best contacts within the local government and began scheduling meetings with council members and lawmakers who had influence over environmental policies. Harriet used his connections within the local fishing community to help gain access to influential figures. He knew that if they could get the backing of a few key fishermen, they would have more leverage when speaking with lawmakers. Despite their growing network, they encountered a major setback. During one of their meetings with a prominent local senator, they were met with resistance. The senator, who had close ties to the fishing industry, was skeptical of their campaign. "Look, I get it," the senator said, leaning back in his chair. "But the fishing industry is a vital part of our economy. These operations are legal in some areas, and they're providing jobs for a lot of people in this community. If you push for these kinds of restrictions, it's going to hurt the livelihoods of a lot of families. We need to think about the bigger picture here." Nastasia's face tightened with frustration. "We're not asking for restrictions that will cripple the fishing industry. We're asking for accountability. We're asking for protections for the marine life that sustains our reefs, our tourism, and our livelihoods. These illegal nets are doing far more harm than good." The senator shook his head. "I understand your concerns, but this is a complex issue. We'll need more data, more studies, and a lot more public support before we can even think about introducing new legislation." Though the conversation didn't end in a win, it fueled Nastasia and her team's resolve. "This is going to take time," she said as they left the senator's office. "But we can't give up. We'll just have to keep pushing until they can't ignore us anymore." Determined to continue their push for change, the group decided to hold their first demonstration. It was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, and they planned to gather at the local beach, where they would showcase the images and videos Max had filmed. The event would include speeches, information booths, and an open discussion for anyone interested in joining the movement. The turnout was overwhelming. Hundreds of people showed up to support the cause, many of them armed with signs and wearing t-shirts emblazoned with the Save the Sharks Hawaii hashtag. Local media outlets arrived to cover the event, and even the local news station ran a story about the demonstration. As Nastasia stood in front of the crowd, speaking about the issue she had dedicated her life to, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. It was clear that this wasn't just her fight, it was the community's fight, and they were in it together. "We have the power to make change," Nastasia said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "We just need to keep pushing, keep fighting, and keep showing up. This is only the beginning." The demonstration at the beach marked a pivotal moment for the campaign, but as Nastasia, Max, and their team soon discovered, the road to change was much longer and more difficult than they had anticipated. While public support continued to grow, the political resistance was fierce, and the illegal fishing operations seemed to be more deeply entrenched than they had ever imagined. In the weeks following the demonstration, the team continued to push for more awareness and legal action. They had garnered significant media coverage, but now they needed to take their campaign to the next level. They were no longer just trying to convince local residents that illegal fishing was a problem. They had to convince powerful stakeholders, including influential business owners and lawmakers, that change was necessary. Jason had already been in contact with several key figures in the state legislature, but progress was slow. The fishing industry, one of Hawaii's oldest and most lucrative sectors, was resistant to any sort of regulatory changes that could potentially cut into their profits. The state's economy relied heavily on the commercial fishing industry, and many of the lawmakers had financial ties to large fishing operations. Nastasia knew that pushing against these powerful interests would take more than just local pressure. They needed more than just grassroots support. They needed a coalition of influential groups who could amplify their voice. That's when they decided to reach out to larger environmental organizations. Jason made contact with Greenpeace, Oceana, and several other international environmental groups. They hoped that aligning themselves with organizations that had the resources and political clout to challenge the fishing industry would give their campaign the muscle it needed. It wasn't long before Greenpeace agreed to lend their support. The environmental giant's involvement gave the campaign a much-needed boost, and it provided the group with access to resources they wouldn't have been able to gather on their own. Greenpeace pledged to help fund the creation of more educational materials, organize rallies, and even lobby lawmakers on their behalf. But while their efforts were beginning to gain momentum, the illegal fishing operations were becoming more aggressive. Local fishermen who were involved in these illicit practices had caught wind of the campaign and were not happy. Some of them resorted to intimidation tactics, hoping to silence the activists who were shining a light on the problem. One night, as Nastasia was heading home after a long day of organizing, she noticed something strange as she parked her car outside her apartment. There, on her front doorstep, was a large package. She stepped cautiously toward it, her heart pounding. There was no return address, and the package had been left in the dead of night. Hesitant, she picked it up, and as she untied the string that bound it, she found a bundle of photographs, disturbing images of dead marine animals tangled in fishing nets. The photos were accompanied by a handwritten note. "Stop, or else." Nastasia froze. This was no longer just an issue of advocacy. It was personal now. She immediately called Max, who arrived within minutes. He was just as shaken as she was. "This is getting out of hand," he said, looking over the photos. We've been pushing hard, but now they're threatening us. This is a warning. Max, always the optimist, tried to stay calm. We've known from the start that this wouldn't be easy, but we can't let this stop us. We have the community behind us. And now we have Greenpeace too. This is bigger than us. We have to keep going. Jason, when he heard about the threat, was equally determined. We can't let these guys intimidate us. This is exactly why we're doing this. To stand up to these kinds of threats. It's time to take the fight to them. Despite the chilling threat, the team wasn't deterred. Instead, they increased their efforts. They organized another rally, this time a larger one with more resources at their disposal. Greenpeace provided them with additional staff, and they created signs, posters, and online ads that highlighted the consequences of illegal fishing on marine life. The rally took place on the steps of the state capitol building in Honolulu. It was one of the largest gatherings they had seen, with more than 1,000 supporters, local residents, tourists, activists, and even a few sympathetic fishermen. Max filmed the event, capturing the energy and passion of the crowd. He filmed interviews with people who had traveled from all over the island to support the cause. Each person shared their personal connection to the ocean and their determination to protect it. Nastasia spoke at the rally, addressing the crowd with a fierce sense of purpose. We are not here to cause trouble. We are here because we care about the future of this island and the future of the oceans that sustain us. What we're fighting for is a future where the next generation can enjoy the same waters we do today, where they can dive into clear, vibrant seas and see the creatures that make this place so unique. Her speech was met with applause, and it was clear that the rally had caught the attention of the local media. The event was covered on the evening news, and soon the hashtag #SaveTheSharksHawaii was trending nationwide. But the real challenge came after the rally, when they received their next round of resistance. Local fishermen, particularly those who were engaged in illegal practices, began staging their own protests. They argued that the campaign was unfair, that it targeted the livelihood of hardworking fishermen who were only trying to make a living. They claimed that the activists were overblowing the issue and that the environmental impact of illegal fishing was being exaggerated. These protests grew more heated. At one point, a group of fishermen stormed one of the campaign's meetings, shouting insults and calling the activists traitors. The tension in the room was palpable. Nastasia had to step in and calm the situation, reminding everyone that the fight wasn't against fishermen. It was against those who exploited the system and put profit over the planet. But the growing resistance wasn't the only thing weighing on the team. As their campaign gained more traction, so did the opposition. It became clear that the illegal fishing syndicates, emboldened by their financial power and influence, were willing to fight back, no matter the cost. The weeks following the rally were marked by an increasing sense of urgency and danger. The message that Nastasia, Max, and their team had worked so hard to spread was beginning to reach critical mass. But so was the opposition. The illegal fishing syndicates, who had long operated in the shadows, now found themselves under a microscope, and they weren't going to let that continue without a fight. The community was divided. While many stood firmly behind the campaign, there was a growing sense of resentment from those who felt their livelihoods were under threat. The protests from local fishermen had escalated from angry chants to more aggressive actions. A few of the campaign's supporters had reported vandalism at their homes, while others received similar threatening notes to the one Nastasia had found weeks earlier. But despite these increasingly hostile tactics, the team refused to back down. They knew the stakes were too high, not just for marine life, but for the future of their community and the island's natural resources. Nastasia's phone buzzed late one evening, a message from Jason lighting up the screen. It read, "We need to talk. Meet me at the office, it's urgent." Max, who had been sitting with her, glanced over at her phone, concern etched on his face. "What's going on?" he asked, already sensing that something had shifted.
"I don't know,"
she replied, her voice tight with anticipation. "But it sounds serious." Within the hour, they were in the office, where Jason was pacing back and forth. His face was grim, and his hands trembled as he handed them a thick file of documents. "We've been hit. The illegal syndicates are trying to push back harder than we thought." Nastasia opened the file and skimmed through the papers. There were reports from local law enforcement, many of them showing signs of intimidation tactics by fishermen connected to the illegal fishing operations. But the most troubling part was the series of messages Jason had uncovered, direct threats to the activists involved in the campaign. Someone had been using the local underworld to spread fear. "They've been threatening more than just us," Jason said. "They've been contacting the people who have been supporting us, local businesses, environmental groups, even members of the press who've been covering our rallies." Max cursed under his breath. They're trying to silence us. I think they're already starting to succeed, Jason continued, his voice growing darker. I've been getting word from some of our allies that they're pulling out. People are scared, and I'm not going to lie to you. It's getting dangerous. The weight of the situation sank in. Their battle wasn't just about raising awareness anymore. It was about survival. The forces against them were growing stronger, and they were willing to do whatever it took to preserve their operations, no matter the cost. I won't let them intimidate us, Nastasha said firmly, her resolve hardening. We've come too far, and we have too many people supporting us. We can't back down now. But Jason's eyes darkened as he sat down at the table, rubbing his face with his hands. It's not that simple, Nastasha. We've already had a few close calls. Someone tried to set fire to the Greenpeace truck last night. A few of the activists who've been getting the most media attention have received direct threats. And we've learned that the syndicates have been bribing some of the local officials to keep their activities off the radar. Nastasha's mind raced, but her expression remained steady. What do we do? Jason looked at her, then Max, his voice quieter now. We need to go public. This isn't just about illegal fishing anymore. This is about corruption, intimidation, and organized crime. We need to make this a national issue, put the pressure on them from all sides. The plan was clear, but the stakes had never been higher. Their goal was to expose the extent of the illegal fishing syndicates, the corruption within local law enforcement, and the dangerous tactics being used to undermine the movement. But doing so would require taking the fight beyond Hawaii, into the public eye of the nation and, hopefully, the world. Max's face lit up with the spark of a new idea. We can get the media on our side. I'll go to the national news outlets, show them the footage we have, the interviews with the fishermen, the threats. If we can get the press involved at a higher level, the government will have no choice but to take us seriously. Nastasha nodded. We need to make this impossible to ignore. But even as they put their plan into motion, they knew that there was a risk. As the campaign gained traction on a national stage, they became more vulnerable to the syndicate's retaliation. It wasn't just the activists anymore. It was everyone involved in the movement, everyone who had lent their voice to the cause. And it was beginning to look like there was no way to avoid the inevitable clash. The media blitz began almost immediately. Max worked tirelessly to get in touch with news networks, journalists, and online influencers who could amplify the story. He compiled the most shocking footage, images of dead marine life, footage of the protests, and interviews with key figures in the campaign. Nastasha did her part by continuing to speak out, using every opportunity to talk about the importance of protecting marine life, the corruption in the local fishing industry, and the dangers posed by the illegal fishing syndicates. The turning point came when an investigative journalist named Lisa Chang, from a major national newspaper, took interest in the story. She reached out to Nastasha and Max, offering to write an in-depth exposé about the issue. The article would delve into the illegal fishing operations, the environmental destruction they were causing, and the corrupt ties that allowed them to flourish. This could be the breakthrough we need, Lisa said during their initial meeting. If I can get this piece out, it will force the government's hand. We'll shine a light on everything they've been trying to hide. Nastasha knew this was their chance, but she also knew it came with risks. The syndicates were watching, and they would do anything to protect their interests. The night before the article was set to be published, Max received an anonymous phone call. The voice on the other end was low, threatening, and unmistakable. You think you can just expose us without consequences? The voice said. If you publish that article, your lives won't be worth a dime. Max's heart raced as he hung up the phone, the weight of the threat settling heavily on his chest. He knew they had reached a critical point. There was no turning back now. The syndicates were not just after their campaign. They were after their lives. Nastasha's voice was resolute when Max shared the news. We've come too far to stop now. We fight on, no matter what. The morning after Max received the anonymous threat, the tension in the air was palpable. The team knew they had crossed a line. There was no going back now. The article that Lisa Chang, the investigative journalist, had written was ready to go live, and it promised to shake the very foundation of the fishing industry in Hawaii. Despite the threats, Nastasha and Max were resolute. They knew the risks, but they also knew the stakes. The illegal fishing syndicates had gotten away with their operations for far too long. If they could expose the corruption, the deception, and the harm being done to the ocean and its creatures, it could lead to real change. This was their moment. Lisa's piece is going live at 10 a.m. today, Max said, pacing in their small office. We'll have to be ready for the fallout. Once the article hits, it's not just going to be local, it's going national. The pressure will be immense. Nastasha nodded, her expression focused. We've made it this far. Now we need to make sure the story gets the attention it deserves. We'll have to keep pushing the message all day. Social media, press conferences, everything. Jason, who had been quiet during most of the discussion, finally spoke up. We need to be prepared for retaliation. They've already shown they're not afraid to make threats. If this goes public, they might take more extreme measures. We can't be caught off guard. Nastasha felt a knot tighten in her stomach. We're already in it. We can't back down now. At 10 a.m. sharp, Lisa's article was published. The headline read, "Illegal fishing syndicates plague Hawaii's shores, threatening marine ecosystems and local communities." The piece was explosive. It detailed not only the damage caused by the illegal fishing operations, but also the corrupt ties that allowed them to flourish. Lisa had spoken to key whistleblowers within the industry, gathered damning evidence of bribery within law enforcement, and exposed the scale of the environmental destruction. The article was clear. These syndicates were not just breaking laws. They were actively destroying Hawaii's marine life and the economy that relied on it. Almost immediately, the backlash began. National news outlets picked up the story, amplifying its reach. Environmental organizations, including Greenpeace, Oceana, and other major groups, rallied behind the campaign, lending their support to the growing movement. The public reaction was swift. There was outrage, anger, and a demand for action. But with the media coverage came the inevitable resistance. Within hours of the article going live, local fishermen who were tied to the illegal syndicates began staging protests. They accused the activists of ruining their livelihoods, calling the campaign a witch hunt, and claiming that the real problem was government overreach. They tried to shift the narrative, arguing that the environmentalists were exaggerating the impact of the illegal nets and the fishing practices. The tension in the community was rising, and soon the protests turned violent. A group of angry fishermen stormed one of the Greenpeace offices, smashing windows and threatening staff members. Local businesses that had supported the campaign were targeted as well, with graffiti and threats sprayed across their storefronts. Despite the escalating threats, the campaign team refused to back down. They knew that this was the moment of truth. The fight for Hawaii's oceans had become a fight for justice, and they would not let the fear and intimidation stop them. Nastasha and Max spent the next few days in constant communication with the media, answering questions and providing updates. The public pressure continued to mount, and as more stories about the syndicates came to light, the government was forced to respond. However, the government's response was not what the team had hoped for. Instead of taking swift action, local lawmakers, many of whom had deep ties to the fishing industry, offered only vague promises to investigate. They were hesitant to take decisive action, fearing the backlash from powerful lobby groups and the potential economic impact on the state's fishing industry. "We can't afford to wait for them to do the right thing," Jason said one evening after a frustrating meeting with local lawmakers. "This is bigger than just local politics. We need to put pressure on the state government, on the national government. We need to take the fight to Washington." Max agreed. "We need to make it clear that this isn't just a local issue anymore. This is a national crisis. If we don't act now, we risk losing entire ecosystems, and potentially entire industries, forever." The team had already begun reaching out to national environmental organizations, urging them to push the issue further up the political ladder. They needed allies in Washington, D.C., to help amplify the message and force the hand of lawmakers who were too afraid to act. A few days later, they received the call they had been waiting for. One of the biggest environmental advocacy groups in the country, the Environmental Defense Fund, EDF, had decided to join the fight. The EDF, with its vast resources and political connections, agreed to help put pressure on the government to act. They also began working on a petition that would demand immediate action to curb illegal fishing operations and increase penalties for those caught using harmful practices. As the campaign gained national attention, the resistance from the illegal syndicates grew more desperate. On a quiet afternoon, Nastasha received a call that would change everything. It was a blocked number. The voice on the other end was cold, menacing. "We warned you to stop," the voice said. "You're digging your own grave. If you don't back off, things will get much worse." Nastasha's heart pounded, but she didn't hesitate. "You can threaten me all you want," she said, her voice steady. "But I'm not going anywhere, and neither is this campaign." The line went dead. That night, Nastasha, Max, Jason, and the rest of the team gathered together, knowing the dangers were more real than ever before. The fight they had started had grown beyond just them. It had become a battle for the future of the ocean, for the future of Hawaii, and for the generations to come. A few months later, the tides began to turn. The media storm and public pressure had worked. The government, facing mounting outrage from the public, finally introduced a new set of regulations to combat illegal fishing. A nationwide ban on the use of harmful fishing nets was enacted, and those caught using them faced stiff penalties. But the victory came at a cost. The team had endured threats, intimidation, and violence, and they knew the fight was far from over. But as Nastasia stood on the shore one evening, watching the ocean stretch out before her, she felt a sense of accomplishment. The sharks, the turtles, the coral, everything they had fought for, was slowly but surely on the path to recovery. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Nastasia knew that their work was far from finished. There would always be new battles to fight, but they had won a crucial one. And the ocean, its life, its future, was worth every sacrifice.